Hey, what's up, y'all? Hey, what's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome. Um, we're gonna try something. It's a new little series thing that we're gonna try. Uh, so as some of you may or may not know, I make music, hip hop music about history. So I thought it'd be cool to like let's just highlight some of my music, some of my songs, selfishly, but let's break them down. And talk about some of the lyrics, some of the verses, the choruses, or whatever in the history that inspired them. I think it'll be quite interesting to kind of get into the mind of an artist like myself. It's really super self-serving, but anyways, I thought it'd be interesting. So, anyways, the first one we're gonna do is we're gonna do my song called "Grave of the Exile" off of my album "The Sword and the Scepter" about Napoleon Bonaparte. This song, "Grave of the Exile," it's an 11-minute hefty boy. But it's about the Battle of Waterloo, which that's the highlight. But in totality, it's about the 100 days, as they call it, which basically encapsulates the moment from which Napoleon escaped from exile originally from the island of Elba, returned to France, took back his empire, um, and then all the way until the Battle of Waterloo and his eventual final exile. So that's what this song is about. Um, but let's get into it. In exile, it's been a long while since he's seen battle. The struggle like a dance. He must return. This can't be the end. He must return to the people in France where the royals take control. Louis 18, rotund, robust. The worst circumstance is it worse than an emperor with some prestige? I think not. He must return to France. All right, so that first verse we talk about he must, Napoleon he must return, right? Um, and I was talking about in the lyrics, a couple of the things I was talking about was like it's been a long time since you've seen battle, referring to battle as a dance, as an art form. I mean, the way Napoleon fought battles, it was kind of that way. Um, but it had been a long time, and he was on this in exile for a while. But France needed him, and the I have a lyric in there about Louis 18th. So that's the Louis 18th was the one who took over, basically reclaimed the throne of France, reestablished the monarchy, which it seems counterintuitive to what France was about at the time, but it was because of the coalition. They were royalists. They supported monarchies, obviously, because many of the countries that were part of the said coalition had monarchies still, and that's really part of the beef between France and the rest of the world at this time period. France was a revolutionary government, now a republic, um, led by Napoleon. Even though Napoleon, at this point in time, was an emperor, but they had revolutionary values. And the coalition, led by Britain, um, Russia, Austria, most of those countries were still very much monarchist, royalist, or whatever you want to call them. So Louis 18th comes into power once they kick out Napoleon. They beat Napoleon um, at the Battle of the Nations, Leipzig. Um, Napoleon basically it's like okay, Louis 18th, yeah, Louis 18th takes over. And I had a lyric about rotund, robust. Well, Louis the 18th, he's a bigger fella, so that's why I threw that in there, trying to paint the picture. He's a bigger guy, and basically, I was saying like, is this any better? Instilling, getting back to this dude. Is it better than having an emperor with some prestige, such as Napoleon? Because he did have prestige. He did have a reputation. So, anyways, that's what that little first section is about. Let's continue. The coalition now is preoccupied with carving up the land and the spoils of war. Far from their thoughts is the French emperor who falls victim to dismay. So I heard his health fluctuates. He becomes sedentary and he's so far away from Josephine, growing wary. But destiny calls, coalition grows lax. Napoleon won't answer, setting sail, heading back. All right, so continuing on, this next part kind of I'm telling about this next part. Really, I'm just talking about Napoleon or the coalition. Basically, they're too busy carving up the spoils of the war against Napoleon at the Congress of Vienna to pay attention to Napoleon, who they have exiled. They thought they were done. They thought Napoleon was done. So they basically weren't paying attention to his movements and really weren't vigilant. They just weren't paying attention. They got caught with their pants down. Let's just be real. So Napoleon, being Napoleon, ever resourceful, ever the thinker. Although in this verse, I also talk about how Napoleon, he went through it for a little bit. They said he was, he became highly sedentary during part of the stay. He was missing home. He was missing his love, Josephine. There's lots of things. So it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, obviously, for a man in exile. But he was still determined, ultimately, to return. And since the coalition grew lax, he was able to. To the shores of France again. Destiny will mend. To the shores of France again. Destiny ascends to the shores of France again. Destiny will mend to the shores of France again. Destiny ascends. So yeah, just talking about once again, returning to the shores of France to reclaim his destiny, and everything will be good. Everything will mend. Everything will be amended and amend together perfectly in harmony. But that's not exactly how it went, is it? So we get a long trip back home, gathering supporters on the way. Seems the soldiers are still quite fond of the little corporal to this day. All along the way, the path is opening, and more rush to his cause. They didn't understand what might happen once the emperor was gone. He's confronted by Marshal Ney, closing in at that fray with a small force, ripping open his coat. He stands in front of them, giving them no choice. If any of you would shoot your emperor, well, here I stand. The men lowered their guns, cheered and rallied to Napoleon again. All right, so here we're talking about Napoleon. He lands on the shores of France. He begins his long trek back home. I'm talking about. I'm painting the picture. He starts to slowly gather up support as he begins this trek. He's marching back to France, back to Paris. And people are still support. He's still got supporters. He's finding many from the military, many soldiers, former soldiers still think of him quite fondly. Now, Marshal Ney was sent to confront him by Louis the 18th. I think Marshal Ney actually volunteered to do this. And I'll mention actually a little bit later on the next verse, but he promised he would bring Napoleon back in an iron cage. Well, they confront him. Napoleon makes a grand gesture. He stands out in front of his soldiers. He rips open his coat and he says, "If any of you would shoot your emperor, here I am. Shoot me. Let's go." And of course, none of them would shoot him because they still thought of him fondly. You have to remember, many of these dudes when fought in battles with Napoleon, they were in the fire. They were in the thick of it with Napoleon. They knew Napoleon. They had fondness and attachment, you know, and so they weren't gonna they weren't gonna do anything to Napoleon, and he knew that. That's why he might have, was maybe a little bit reluctant. Who knows? But I think he kind of had an idea that they weren't gonna actually shoot him if he challenged them. Could you imagine though, if like one of them was just like one of them just like shot him? Oh my god. Anyways, continue.
Heading now, straight for the capital. Napoleon completes his escape. He was supposed to be brought back in an iron cage, and now he's here, season fade.
So that's the thing I mentioned about Marshal Ney. He was supposed to be brought back in an iron cage, and now he's back.
The coalition now learns of the escape and puts their differences aside to arm once again the seventh coalition. Hopefully the last time.
So, Napoleon shows back to, he shows up to Paris. He takes everything back. He reinstitutes, some infrastructure, reestablishes basically, his old, his old structures. Louis XVIII gets up out of there. Forget him, although, it's not the last time we'll see him. And yeah, that's kind of how it went down. But Napoleon might have underestimated his enemies because I don't really think he thought that they would be able to get together again and reunite to stop him. I think he underestimated just how much they disliked him. As much as they were fighting with each other at the Congress of Vienna over, the spoils of war and territorial gains and all that, the second they learned that Napoleon was back, they all were just like, all right, bet, let's go. Forget all this. We'll come back to this later, although we will come back to this later. Don't try to pull no fast ones. Anyways, we coming back to that. Let's go kick Napoleon's ass again. So, I don't know. I don't know if Napoleon really thought that they would do that, but they did. Dramatic pause.
Events are in motion now, can't be undone. Napoleon establishes some order. His Austrian wife, more important than his son, don't return and it hurts, but soon it's over. The coalition falls to Wellington's command. The British and the Prussians took the stand. Separate they deploy Napoleon, learns of this and heads out to split them up once again.
Okay, so at the very end of the Battle of Paris and all that stuff, once it was clear that the Allied coalition was going to take Paris, Napoleon's wife, his Austrian wife, and his son were evacuated from the capital. And when Napoleon returned, I think he maybe had the expectation that they would come back, but they did not come back. A little bit scandalous, I would say, because his wife, like I said, she was Austrian, his enemies. So I don't think she had any intention of coming back. But I think Napoleon really just wanted his son back. He really just wanted his son because, his son is the heir to his empire, right? So that makes sense. But they did not return. Okay. Now, the coalition at this time, the seventh coalition, is given to the command of Wellington of the British. Now, it would basically fall down to Wellington of Britain and Blucher of Prussia, and they would be kind of the spearhead of this next phase of the Napoleonic Wars and subsequently the last phase of the Napoleonic Wars. Um, so yeah. Oh yeah, but importantly to know, Wellington and Blucher's armies were split. Now, if you follow the Napoleonic Wars, this is kind of something that happens a lot with his enemies, and for some reason they just don't learn. It happened also in his campaign to try to defend France before he was sent to exile, where his enemies are just split up. So he just takes them out one by one. He just spearhead. He goes right in between all of them, takes them out, separates them, so they can't assemble their numeric superiority and defeat him. You would think they would learn, but they don't. They make the same mistake here. Wellington and Blucher are split up, so Napoleon sees this as an opportunity to do what Napoleon be doing, divide and conquer.
Napoleon moves out towards Belgium to cut Wellington off from Blucher. Moving at speed that is not to be expected. He closes in on them, keep them split up the objective. Then wipe them out, each one independently, and try to win peace. Yes, he said it. Detach Grouchy to harass the Prussians and confront the British where they might be headed.
So there you go. I mean, just dictate. I just lay it out for y'all in the lyrics, the strategy. You know, he's trying to cut Wellington off from Blucher. There's also some small engagements that take place. He detaches one of his marshals, Marshal Grouchy, to harass the Prussians, and this will keep the Prussians away, so that he can focus on the British, annihilate the British, and win peace. I mean, at this point in time, Napoleon actually really just wanted peace. I think at this point in time, he might have just been wary of battle. I mean, he was getting older, um, and I think he really did want peace, but he wasn't gonna get it from these dudes. They were determined, man, to stop him. So, anyways, that's the strategy: divide and conquer. They fell into it once again. Napoleon's one step ahead. Seems to be a theme, but things would change.
Wellington pulls back to a position, just a small village on the map with some clue. A strong defensive point, he has been there before. A place known as Waterloo.
Okay, so Waterloo. That's where the battle gets its name. Small little village. I could say in the lyric, a defensive point, a small defensive point. It had defensive capabilities because of the topography of the land. Wellington had been in this region before this battle. He had spent a lot of time there, so he knew what he was doing. So even though Napoleon thought he was a step ahead, Wellington lured him to this location. Wellington basically picked this location for this battle that would become infamous, Waterloo.
The heavens open up on the eve of the battle. Both sides face a deluge, waiting for the sun. The ground turns to mud, slowing down the cannons. The movement of horses, men, and guns.
So yeah, it started to rain. Heavens opened up. Um, and yeah, it started to rain like crazy, man. That Belgium rain, bro. I mean, it that the rain in Flanders, bro. The Flemish rain. It would come to bear fruit in a future war, a more devastating war. But once again, it happened here. The rain, the ground just turns into mud. Horses can't move. You can't move your cannons. You can't move your supplies. It just becomes miserable for the soldiers, miserable for everyone involved. But it seemed like it was fate. It seemed like somebody was against Napoleon.
History is written by those victorious, the ones who fight, overcome any obstacle that is placed before them. Stay calm, even fighting on the sun. Napoleon and Wellington stay up most of the night, deciding disposition of their troops that will sacrifice all in this battle, that will long be remembered.
So Napoleon and Wellington, you got to imagine, bro, they were under a tremendous amount of stress. Both of them knew it was at stake the next day. I mean, Wellington knew that if he couldn't hold off Napoleon at least long enough so that he can get reinforcements from his Prussian allies, Blucher, that all they would lose. And that just was unacceptable to the coalition. That was unacceptable to their ideology and to their beliefs. And at this time, they saw Napoleon as a tyrant, as a monster. Napoleon, he knew if he couldn't defeat Wellington here, right now, that he would be done too, and that he would lose his empire. So you got to imagine these dudes staying up well into the night, trying to decide just exactly how they were going to, um, you know, strategize this battle. And battle they did.
The next day, the sun rises to reveal the mud. Napoleon cannot place his cannons until just after 11 a.m. A delay that will hurt them in this action. Both sides face each other, the British on the high ground with the command of a ridge. But the battle opens up, attacking at the Hougoumont. British forces posted there will persist.
All right, so yeah, the next day, still muddy. Napoleon is informed by his cavalry officers that look, or his artillery command, that look, we can't move these heavy cannons into place until the mud dries. And Napoleon really was just kind of like, nah, just figure it out. You need to move them now. Figure this shit out. But they told him, like, look, it's just not possible. So they had to wait. It delayed their movement and their placement. And because of this, the opening sequences of the battle, French artillery wasn't really in place yet. Obviously, that's bad news. Also, there's a place called the Hougoumont. Now, the Hougoumont it's basically just like a farmhouse that was it was just like, I can't remember. I'm trying to think of the exact placement on the battlefield. It was off to like the. It's hard to get a mental image right now of exactly what the placement, but the Hougoumont was off to like the side of the main battlefield. But it was a strategic place that you needed to control, to basically protect your flanks, right? The British had control of the Hougoumont. They also had the high ground at the beginning of this battle. So the French were really up against it right from the beginning. And they had to fight desperately to try and win the day.
The French infantry advances now. The British cannons fire explode all around them. No turning back despite earth that's displaced. Fire cannonball at your feet where it's placed. Back at the Hougoumont, advancing through a small forest. Rifles start to fire frantically. Get hit by a bullet shot from way over there. The British at the farm behind the wall shoot violently.
So yeah, man, the British at the Hougoumont, they had there's stone barriers around this area that the British riflemen were able to post up on and just start raining bullets, musket balls down on the French advance, the French infantry that was advancing through this. It was like a it was like a small forest, brush, whatever you want to call it. But they were just being fired upon, and the British had a really strong defensive point at the Hougoumont. Uh, yeah, the French infantry advanced into cannon fire from the British, who had the high ground. So, obviously, as you can imagine, it probably wasn't very pleasant.
Bullets rain down, musket balls rain down, silencing the soldiers that are hit. All around the village, infantry advances. All around, infantry is killed. Now you start to feel the ground trembling beneath you. That's the cavalry advancing. Drawing out swords, drawing out lances to chase you down. Despite their enhancing.
So, if you can imagine being on a battlefield as an infantry soldier, these battles a lot of the times were won and dictated by not just artillery but cavalry. And we're talking about masses and masses of horses charging, and horses thundering hooves on the ground. So you can imagine that it would damn near feel like an earthquake, right? Beneath your feet, probably, as these cavalry units got close to you as an infantry foot soldier. Could you imagine how terrifying that would be? Not to mention these cavalry soldiers armed with swords and lances, so they could just chop you down. And there's really not a lot you can do. You can't run away from a horse. You ain't that fast, bro. So just imagine the scenes on this battlefield, because there was some epic cavalry charges during this battle. Um, um, the Battle of Waterloo, right? So it just, yeah, it descends into chaos from this point.
The British heavy cavalry now charges forward, looking to rout their infantry. Recklessly forward, the horses thundering. Triumph doesn't follow, you see. The charge, it descends into chaos falling off. Royal Dragoons resist, fierce, inflicting casualties on the British brigades. Both soldiers and officers, they pierce.
So the British had their heavy cavalry charge into the battle. They were the first ones to deploy their cavalry like this, and it didn't really work out for them. Um, there's a lot of chaos on the battlefield at this point. There's a lot of smoke, a lot of cannons going off, and the horses and all the charges kind of descend into chaos. And because of this, units are split up. Units kind of, um, they lose their potency when they start to split up and separate. So, yeah, the British heavy cavalry ended up getting shot down, ended up getting repulsed, and they lost a lot of men in this attack, which was probably a little bit premature.
Napoleon's help takes them from the battlefield. Now, at a crucial moment, the British floundering, but here comes Blucher and his hussars. Cavalry storming, they are off in the distance, started by both sides. In the meantime, Marshal Ney will charge his cavalry across and up the hill towards artillery, and they won't go far.
So Napoleon was dealing with a lot of health issues. A lot of this was stemming from his time in exile on the island of Elba. He wasn't 100% himself once he came back. Um, so he was kind of forced from the battlefield at a certain point. Now, at this point in time, off in the distance, they could see Blucher's Prussian army coming. Like, they were closing in off in the distance. Both sides saw this. And it was this realization at this point in time that probably propelled Marshal Ney to take his cavalry of the French units and charge basically up the hill, the high ground that the British had, and try to basically silence their cannons, overtake their artillery, and basically take this point. We'll see in the next couple verses why that was kind of folly. But at this point in time, Napoleon was taken away, and it was a very crucial moment. Um, and some people didn't even know; they weren't sure if it was actually the Prussians. Some of them thought it might have been Grouchy coming back because Napoleon was actually waiting for him to return, even though he instructed Grouchy to stay harassing the Prussians. We don't even know eventually what the freak actually happened to Grouchy and why he never actually returned.
Here in another village that becomes a grave. It doesn't matter which nation falls, they will say. Both sides fought valiantly to win, yes they say. But courage is only for the living, not the dead. Here in another village that becomes a grave. It doesn't matter which nation falls, they will say. Both sides fought valiantly to win, yes they say. But courage is only for the living, not the dead.
So that little mini chorus, mini hook, as I call it, is basically just talking about like the nature of these battles. You have a tiny village that nobody knows really about until it becomes infamous because of the battle that was fought there. It's just another village. And this village, known as Waterloo, also becomes a graveyard because so many men are cut down and die on this field in this village. And during the course of these wars, during the course of history, it's just another village becoming a grave. And they talk about courage and bravery, but really courage and bravery and all that stuff only matters if you're alive. It doesn't matter to the dead. It doesn't matter to the fallen. Just wanted to point that out and really drive that home in that hook.
Marshal Ney and his men charge up the escarpment towards artillery, grave shot causing losses. Eventually they cause the artillery to flee up over the ridge where the British form a flawless into square formations holding strong against the charge. Firing at horses, hate to say it, but they fall. Volley after volley, Ney's men whirl around just like a cyclone. The guns and hoods the only sound.
So Marshal Ney, they charge up the escarpment, which is basically just like it's just another way of saying like a ridge, a hill, or whatever. They charge up that. They eventually they're charging into grape shot from the cannons. It's just a crazy thing to do, right? I mean, almost damn near unaliving status, but they did it, and eventually, because of their persistence and they didn't waver, the artillery, they had to give up their position and flee over the ridge, right? But over the ridge, what Marshal Ney and his cavalrymen couldn't see, the British had a large force still gathered up on top of that ridge, and they formed up into the square formations. And these square formations are really good at repelling cavalry because it's like a dense block of soldiers, and all you see is just rifles all around the edges of this square pointed at you, and they're shooting in what is it like they're shooting basically like a lot of rounds, right? And they're doing it in what's the word I'm looking for? God dang it. It's like alternating shots or whatever. But either way, it's a formidable thing, and the horses can't really like get in. They can't. The horses can't charge into these rifles, right? So what ends up happening, and like I said in the lyric, they're just whirling around. The cavalry, they're just whirling around these square formations like a cyclone, and it's really just like spinning their hooves basically. And the only thing you can hear is the hooves, the horses, and the shots from the guns. It's utter chaos.
Here in another village that becomes a grave. It doesn't matter which nation falls, they will say. Both sides fought valiantly to win, yes they said. But courage is only for the living, not the dead. Here in another village that becomes a grave. It doesn't matter which nation falls, they will say. Both sides fought valiantly to win, yes they said. But courage is only for the living, not the dead. Now the Prussians arrive off in the distance, a steady torrent of hussars flow like a river through the battlefield, falling on the French flanks. Napoleon is wondering where Grouchy is, he thinks. Panic starts to set in, the tide is now changing. Infantry and cavalry routed, yes they're breaking. The hay and the Hugama backing out our hands. Who will stand strong against the odds? Elite men.
So at this point in time, the Prussians arrive, and they basically come in like a torrent, like a river, and they just channel. They're just coming in and swooping across the battlefield, across the French flanks, and it's just utter chaos now. And everything starts. The tide completely switches over to the Allies, to the Prussians and the British, and the French are basically now left to just fend for them. They're just fighting off the inevitable. They're going to lose at this point. And Napoleon, kind of in denial, I don't know, really was still wondering where Grouchy was. But you have to think, like, so he deployed Grouchy to like harass the Prussians. He should have been on the Prussians' behinds, but the Prussians show up. So where was he? Why wasn't he on them? He should have been following them basically into Waterloo, but he didn't. He just disappeared. Um, and so Napoleon was just like, "Where is this man? Where is Grouchy?" I don't know. We don't know. But this was basically the thing that changed the whole tide of the battle. Um, Once the Prussians arrived, it was just like, "Yo, we don't know." They also lost control of the Hougoumont, which they what did capture at one point, and La Haye, which is also another kind of like farmhouse area. They lost control of all these areas, key points on their flanks, and that was it, man. The rest is, as you say, history. But some French soldiers would stand strong against this. They're elite soldiers, known as the Imperial Guard.
The Imperial Guard keeps moving through the battlefield. They are choosing death or glory. Well, maybe both. In the chaos of a battlefield with mud, blood, and smoke. They fire from the squares as the enemy surrounds them. They fire in the air defiantly, so astounding. The British keep on pressing, closing on these men. The most loyal to the French cause can't pretend, but many start to fall around each other, brave souls. The British signal them to surrender, legend goes. The only reply they receive is remember, the guard dies. It does not surrender.
So, the Imperial Guard, Napoleon's most loyal troops. Okay? These dudes were rugged veterans of many, many battles. They were with Napoleon through his most infamous battles, his most infamous victories, and yes, even his most infamous defeats. These dudes were soldiers, bro. They were going to stand against the British no matter what, and the Prussians no matter what. And they formed up their squares and they made their stand, their last stand, and they were firing their weapons and they were standing defiant. But in the end, it just they couldn't withstand the overwhelming odds in their in their face. And the British were like, "Look, it's over. You've lost. Just surrender. Give it up. We'll take you prisoner. We're not gonna kill you. Just surrender." And the famous reply that the Imperial Guard gave is, "The guard dies. It never surrenders." So they would rather die in battle than surrender to their enemy. A different time, yo. Different human beings, man. I tell you, but it just goes to show you the desperation and also the gravity of this situation. You go from maybe have you can see victory to just utter ruin in the course of a day.
As a battlefield that deteriorates, blood from the dead flows like a river through the mud. Masses of bodies fell heaped on each other, no glorious sight to be seen. If you wonder, as night starts to fall, Napoleon has fled. Luca and Wellington, me among the dead and living, to congratulate, claim victory for Napoleon, his great defeat.
So, night fell on the battle scene, and it was quite a sight to be seen, quite horrific. You're talking about many, many thousands and thousands of men left to bleed out on the battlefield. So, as you can imagine, that blood is going to collect and it's going to pool and, yes, form rivers and, yes, flow through the battlefield. There's no glory here. There's no glory there to be found, to be seen. That's the reality of these battles. Wellington and Blucher met amongst all this, and they claimed their victory. Um, but it was quite sobering. Very similar to the feelings after the Battle of Leipzig. Just the carnage that was left. Napoleon, he fled back to Paris. Once it's they knew the battle was over, he had to go back to Paris. Just like similar to his Russian retreat, he had to get there as quick as he could because, well, he thought he could try to raise another army, but not this time, buddy.
Napoleon heads to Paris, thinking he can raise another army once again. But this is folly, he will never ascend. He has no support now from the people. He has no support from the military. He must abdicate. Now a second time, exile. The world's really wary. The coalition now sends him away to an island so far away. To Helena, yes, the farthest reaches of the world. Yes, they're learning. Never again can he escape fate. At St. Helena, he is left yearning.
And that's, my friends, is the end. Napoleon returns back to Paris, thinking he can raise another army, but he has no support. Not only just from the people, but not even from the military. None. Coalition gets together and to decide his fate. This time they're like, yo, we're going to send you into exile again, but we're going to send you to a place so far away, so remote that you can't even fathom coming back. So they send him to the island of St. Helena, which is located off the southern coast of Africa, the western coast, the southwestern coast of Africa. It really as far away from anything as you could possibly get exiled to in this time period. And that's where they sent him. Um, and really, that's the kind of the end of Napoleon's story. There's things that happen in his exile, but basically that's it. He loses the Battle of Waterloo, The 100 Days, as I mentioned in the beginning, concludes with the reestablishment of Louis XVIII um, back to the throne, and France kind of goes into turmoil for a while after that. So that's how that goes down. That's the breakdown of the song "Grave of the Exile" by myself, Warwolf X. If you want to hear the full song without interruptions, go ahead and check out my channel, my music channel, Warwolf X. It is linked to this channel. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna catch y'all next time. We're gonna break down another song. But until then, my friends, stay epic, stay safe, and I'll catch y'all next time. We out.